So if you're curious to teach in Japan and you've been furiously exploring all over the internet to find out how you can best do this, you've no doubt come across in the forums on Reddit or through your own research and other sources that there's positions related to dispatch companies and there's positions related to direct hires. Dispatch companies being all these big companies that you hear about, which are like middlemen to you and the school that you work for. A direct hire meaning that you would actually work directly for the Board of Education that the school you're going to work at is linked to. And kind of like the easy answer to this, where people are like, which is better? You'll very quickly hear most people say, well, direct hire is better. But, well, hearing that, I don't think people really discuss in great detail what exactly are the real differences between these two positions. What sort of things will you notice, and is it worth picking one over the other for those reasons? And so I thought I'd break them down, what they actually are. So to begin with, I think the first place to start would actually be the interview process, because that's the beginning of it all. And so direct hire positions, where they differ in the interview process, is usually that where with dispatch companies, you won't need any experience. There's a really good chance that you won't even need to have taught before. Like, I don't even mean like on the ground experience. You don't have to have any sort of history with teaching whatsoever. Whereas if you were to work for a dispatch company, they are not dispatch company, sorry. If you were to work for a direct hire, then they would want you to have experience. Not a lot. In some cases, I think people have even gotten away with just a year, maybe a half a year. But for you to go in there with zero experience and to get hired would be fairly unlikely, I would say. The next thing that changes in their interview process, and this isn't across all Board of Educations, but I would say generally speaking it's true, is that you would need to speak some amount of Japanese. So when I interviewed for the Board of Education that I work for, I actually need to re-interview every single year for them. I have to do an interview in Japanese, and it's incredibly nerve-wracking if you're not that confident. Obviously, if you were just arriving in the country, that's probably something that's difficult enough for you that you may not actually want to do it because it's so intimidating. But I would encourage people at that point to know that the level of Japanese that's required in those interviews, they say usually somewhere around N3, but if you've made a really concerted effort to speak the language, I would throw your hat in there just to figure out, as a test of ability, where you're at in terms of your listening and speaking. Don't be intimidated by that. I almost didn't apply to this job for that reason. I was like, my language isn't at that level yet. But then I thought, I'll give it a try anyways. And I was encouraged very much by a guy who already worked here. He said, don't worry about it. Mine's not so good either, so give it a try at least. And I did, and I succeeded. So the interview process is quite different, where, as I like to make fun of dispatch companies, although I worked for one, they'll basically hire you out of nowhere, from nothing, absolutely nothing, where a direct hire position will require some experience and a little bit of Japanese. Now, the next big obvious one, probably the first thing that people would want me to talk about, actually, is the difference in money. So obviously, this is probably where direct hire positions get the clear, better reputation, is that they always pay more. They absolutely pay more because you don't have a middleman between you and the school or the Board of Education. There's nobody cutting into your cash. And so you're going to make more money, generally speaking, and it can be kind of a little bit or it can be a lot more. And you get ranges from, I would say probably the cheapest BOE would pay $280, which is better than the $230 that you get with most dispatch companies, all the way upwards of an excess of $350, depending on where you are. But then, what I really like to stress between the big difference in the money game between these two, barring the fact that just generally your salary is much higher at one of these direct hire positions, is that it's all the other hidden little things that are contributed to by the Board of Education if you work for them directly, which is far, far superior than a dispatch company, which is to say things like your pension or things like your health insurance, where It's not supported by dispatch companies. They'll do anything they can to weasel out of it. It's the business model. It's what I would do if I ran a big evil dispatch company. But with the Board of Education, as you are considered like a government worker, then they have to contribute to those things. And so you get subsidized for your pension. You get subsidized for your health care. They're going to help with a lot of those costs, which you can essentially look at as being more money in your pocket, because it's more money not coming out of your pocket. So that's a really big difference between the two. Next, I would talk about like, how is it generally different at the schools? I hope I don't run out of battery here. And this is a big difference, actually. You might not think so. You're like, well, you're teaching the same classes. How could it be more or less different? Well, it's in the fact that the dispatch company so cares about their reputation that it's usually less about you teaching lessons so much as teaching lessons exactly how they want, and that they will not lose their contract in that area, which I think is quite constricting in terms of what you could produce, what you could do. And so your freedom is limited insofar that you must adhere to the dispatch company's will, which isn't usually centered on better teaching or more interesting lessons, and more on them retaining a contract, which is like, do no harm, aka do as little as possible, which is very little at all. Now, when you work for the BOE, you get, I think, a little more freedom, because there's this sense of like you're just directly teaching that class. Now, you might have mandates that come down from the Board of Education in the way that they want you to teach the classes, but whatever. And usually those aren't so many, and any initiatives that they have are there to improve the kids anyways. It's not about them protecting a company and a contract, it's about education. So they're education-oriented sort of changes that you have to make. So I think, generally speaking, you would say that not only do you have a lot more control as compared to the dispatch companies, but also the way that you're receiving input into your job is more aligned with education as opposed to contract self-preservation, which you get from dispatch companies. So that's a really big thing. Now, what this will also mean, because basically this like kind of do no harm element that you have in the dispatch companies, is that you would do less actual interaction at the school because you are a middleman. You are not actually a full employee of the school. You are a representative from this dispatch company at the school. And so that means that extracurricular things are almost like frowned on, because it's one more chance. It's one more risk for you to do something stupid, you dumb little monkey. And you might lose the contract again. Whereas it's quite the opposite in a dispatch company, or in a direct hire position, because you're considered a member of staff. So wouldn't you do more with the kids? And what this can, I'm going to kind of like basically the end favoring I would have, depending on what your interest is, where you would want to fall between these two, is that, and I guess I'm arriving at it a little bit sooner. I've got one more point to make. But it's kind of like, if you want to be left alone and you do want to come here for the working holiday, then there's actually a lot that's really good about the dispatch companies, because it's like you're minimally there. You're told to basically create no noise, create no hubbub. There, I used it. And have as little impact as possible. And that means that you won't be asked to do all this extra bullshit at the school. You won't be expected to teach good lessons. You won't be expected to really have much other to do with the school than to fulfill the absolute minimum. Now, for somebody who's on a working holiday visa or a working holiday mindset, that's actually not so bad, right? Because you're like, I didn't come here to be the world's greatest teacher. I came here because I thought it would be sweet to see Japan. I'd like a little bit of exposure to teaching, maybe put that on my resume, but I don't need to be the next #1 teacher in the world. That's not the goal here. And this is the final kind of thing that will feed into what I was going to last talk about, which is holidays. So one of the huge things with the dispatch companies is usually that because they just want you teaching at the school when the school's on, this means that around Christmas and around summer, you're going to have these big mega breaks because you're not going to school. Whereas if you work in a direct hire position because you're a full member of staff, you will have extended breaks during that time, but not nearly close to what you would have in a dispatch company, where the first time I returned to Canada, when I worked for a dispatch company in the first year that I was here, I went back for 6 weeks, where that's nothing that I could do now. I still get a great break. I usually go back to Canada for 3 weeks. I didn't this year, but your time will be spent preparing for the following school year at the school in those breaks that you would normally have. And that's how I kind of return again to this. What's your preference? Are you here for a bit more of a long term? Then, well, it makes a lot of sense to be in the dispatch company because, well, are in the direct hire, because one of the characteristics of you getting those longer breaks at the dispatch company is that you're obviously not going to be paid in full. You're going to be paid half or whatever, or they've reduced your whole salary down that you'll be paid in full, but that's because everything else dropped. So when you're at the direct hire, you're always receiving that set your watch by it salary, which is going to reward you the same amount that it did every single month of the year. And so this is where your decision needs to lie, I think. It's good to understand basically what's different between the two, so you can go in not blind, but then the sort of end outcome of what you want to do. Do you want to teach for a bunch of years? Do you want to become the super teacher? Do you want to eventually go into something like teaching in a university or a private school or an international school? Or are you here, and I think there's no shame in this at all, to have an amazing international experience in a really, really cool country, which is well worth exploring. You are going to have way less time to do that if you go into a direct hire position, and so in my opinion it's actually worth going with the dispatch. Be a little more frugal with your money, have a little bit more money saved, and in these massive breaks, explore the country. I go back to Canada, but you don't have to go back to wherever you're from. You could stay here, and in those massive breaks, really explore the country. So these are the differences, I think, most notable about these two very well-known positions that you can possibly teach in, and why or why not you would choose one over the other. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please do like the video. Please do smash the bell and subscribe to the channel if you want more stuff like this. Leave me a comment down below if you will. That would be awesome. What's your preference? Do you want to teach for a dispatch company, stay short term? Do you want to stay long term and go for direct hire? It's interesting. We all have a different life to lead. Thanks very much for watching. Please do consider supporting me on my Patreon, because that keeps the channel flowing. It keeps it alive. There's a lot of cool stuff there, a lot of cool bonuses for joining up. I could never say thanks enough just for watching though, and I will catch you guys in the next video. The clock has run out. Peace.